One of the most remarkable aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is its unique history. Throughout the world, great stories from faithful church members have only added to that history. This program shares some of these incredible stories of faith, perseverance, hope, and inspiration. You're listening to Legacy. I'm your host, Nathan Wright. The basis for Salt Lake City's design was Joseph Smith's concept for the City of Zion. In 1831, the prophet Joseph Smith proclaimed from Kirtland, Ohio, that Independence, Missouri had been appointed and consecrated for the gathering of the saints. Joseph sought nothing less than the creation of sacred gathering places where the pure in heart would dwell in Zion in preparation for the second coming of the Savior. Joseph Smith did not leave the creation of Zion to chance. And here to discuss the City of Zion plot and its influence on Salt Lake City and elsewhere is Craig D. Galley. Craig is an attorney with the Salt Lake City office of the law firm Holland and Hart. He's also an adjunct professor of law at Brigham Young University. Craig earned a BA and an MA at Brigham Young University and a Juris Doctorate at Columbia University. Craig, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself and why you have an interest in urban planning then and now.
Well, a number of years ago, my family and I moved from the Washington, D.C. area here in 1993, and I had previously lived in Provo for my BYU education, but it was really the first time I had lived for any length of time in Salt Lake City, and shortly thereafter I was asked to sit on the Salt Lake City Planning Commission, which was an enjoyable, interesting experience, but the name Planning Commission connoted to me the concept that we were going to be doing some planning. And the first thing I did, or one of the first things, was ask for a copy of the Salt Lake City General Plan. I knew that by statute, every municipality in the state was required to have a plan. And as it turned out, we didn't have a general comprehensive plan for Salt Lake City. And I was puzzled by that. It turns out that we have area master plans, but not really a general plan. And from there, I started wondering when the first plan for the Salt Lake City and Salt Lake Valley was created, and that took me all the way back to when Brigham Young arrived. He started planning immediately upon arriving in the Salt Lake Valley. He had with him, though, a plat that he had obtained from Joseph Smith previously that was intended to be used in creating the City of Zion in Jackson County, Missouri. And having a real interest in church history, I started finding everything I could out about that plat and that plan to see what the intent was. Since I was sitting on the Salt Lake City Planning Commission, I thought there might be something here useful for present-day planners.
So just for definition's sake, a plat basically is a city plan.
A plat is a city plan, that's correct.
So let's talk about this original city plat that I guess Joseph Smith drew with his own hand.
That is correct. It's an amazing document because it includes detailed margin notes or marginalia, which describe in a fair amount of detail Joseph Smith's intent as to the physical design and the characteristics that he wanted to see in the City of Zion as it was developed. So he drew up the plat and gave it to Edward Partridge, and with the hope that Edward Partridge would buy up land, use the plat to build a city and build a temple in Jackson County.
Tell us more about this plat. What type of a city was it going to be? How big? What was its main purpose?
The city was intended to cover about 1 1/2 square miles, and it was divided up into European-style grid pattern with approximately 2,600 half-acre lots. And when it was fully built out, it would accommodate a population of between 15,000 and 20,000 people. There would be a city center, which would consist of blocks to accommodate a temple complex and other ecclesiastical buildings. And then located adjacent to the temple would be a bishop's storehouse, a repository of contributed tithes and offerings, food and clothing, and so forth. each of these blocks was quite large. It was 660 feet by 660 feet. Surrounding the central blocks would be schools and stores, and then residences for individual families. And these lots would be situated so that no single dwelling fronted another. And in the margins, Joseph indicated that this would preserve, at the same time, both a sense of openness but also privacy. The streets in this grid would have four major streets in the center that were 132 feet wide, and then other streets in the surrounding area where the residents would be living would be 82.5 feet in width, and they were all oriented to the cardinal direction, so you had a nice grid, tight
North,
grid.
south, east, west.
Correct. The homes he wanted to see constructed of brick or stone, and they would be set back approximately 25 feet from the street with the intent that the residents would be able to have gardens and orchards that would both beautify and give them sustenance.
It sounds almost like this was Utah's original homeowners association.
It almost does, and it was... like many homeowner associations, these requirements, at least Joseph Smith intended that they be followed. They weren't just aspirational. He felt it quite important that Edward Partridge understood from correspondence that we've seen the layout and the characteristics of this town. And once the town reached that 15 to 20,000 resident population, then the intent was that the settlers would move to another nearby location. It might be 10 miles away or so forth, and they would build a new town. So the margin note actually says, quote, "When the square is thus laid off and supplied, lay off another in the same way, and so fill up the world in the last days." To get a feeling about the size and density of these towns, think about, if you will, the little towns of Ephraim and Manti today. They both cover about 3 square miles, so they were a little larger in size than the Platte contemplated. But those towns are around 5,000 people. So the density was much lower. So the city of Zion would be smaller versions of Ephraim and Manti in size, but they would include 3 to 4 times the number of people. So we're talking about a fairly high dense area in terms of population.
So do you know why Joseph Smith was opposed to more densely populated metro areas? I mean, 20,000 person city is okay in size, but it's certainly not maybe what he had seen elsewhere on the East Coast or whatever.
I think we do have a hint. Joseph understood that there would be a connection between the compact design of these communities and educational opportunities. If you have a high density but surrounded by agricultural land, but it's a small community where you could walk from one end to another in really no more than 10 or 15 minutes, that would allow people engaged in agrarian pursuits, the farmers and the ranchers, to live within that urban center, if you will, the town. And here's what Joseph Smith said about that. "The farmer and his family, therefore, will enjoy all the advantages of schools, public lectures, and other meetings. His home will no longer be isolated, and his family denied the benefits of society, which has been and always will be the greater educator of the human race. But they will enjoy the same privileges of society and can surround their homes with the same intellectual life, the same social refinement as will be found in the home of the merchant or banker or professional man." Close quote. So it was important for him to inculcate in the families that would be living in this society, whether the children were children of bankers or farmers, the opportunity to all go to school in the same area and be surrounded and influenced by the same high degree of intellectual and cultural life.
And it allowed the farmers to be close to their work as well, because it's not a very large city and the farm is very close on the outside of the plan.
Exactly. Nobody would have a long commute.
So we know that the city of Zion didn't work out. The saints were persecuted, driven away, and the city of Zion was never built. Where did this influence actually take place? What cities were built based on this?
One of the earliest cities was far west, and then in Clay County. They did use the Platte to lay out the grid and start building homes. Of course, the saints were driven out of far west in Clay County. They then went to Nauvoo. Again, we see some adaptation of the Platte, but fairly close adherence to the original City of Zion Platte. The saints, again, are moved out of Nauvoo and in winter quarters after their exodus from Illinois. Again, winter quarters was designed after the City of Zion Platte. But most importantly, when they came to the Salt Lake Valley, one of the first orders of business for Brigham Young, 4 days after their arrival, was Brigham Young proposed a new settlement with a temple lot, streets that were 132 feet wide, 25-foot wide sidewalks, houses set back 20, 25 feet from the street. Again, he was going off of the same City of Zion Platte.
With the original design, it seemed like the temple was in the center. And here in Salt Lake, the Salt Lake Valley, the temple's to the extreme north. What happened?
That is a good point. One variation from the City of Zion Platte was really dictated by a combination of topography and where Brigham felt inspired to place the temple site. Very shortly after arriving, as you all know, the brethren went to Ensign Peak. Some of them stayed below, and Brigham had some of his colleagues identify or stand in the area where he wanted to see the temple block. And that temple block was not centrally located in the valley. It was closer to the side of the foothills, of course, where we now have the Salt Lake Valley. So in August of 1847, which was after the location of the temple block, he had his surveyor, Jesse Fox, take the City of Zion Platte and then create a plat for Salt Lake City that accommodated the temple, not in the valley center, but near the northern foothills. But nevertheless, this central block of the temple represented the spiritual center of the community and the 0-mile marker, if you will, for the city in all of the cardinal directions. The original plat had 114 blocks, and then later it was expanded to 177 blocks. But in all material aspects, it did follow the City of Zion Platte. It had 5- and 10-acre tracts that, again, were aligned in this grid pattern for commercial and light industry manufacturing along the edge of the city, and then residents would live around the central block, which would have the church administration building and temples and so forth.
The whole concept of designing a city to help build a Zion people is a little interesting to me. How could a physical design of a city possibly have anything to do with building people spiritually?
Based on the writings and records of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, the physical design of the city was a means to a lofty end. The end was to build a prosperous, self-sustaining, and collegial community of saints. The community design encouraged certain positive attributes of a Zion people. And those attributes included things like having equitable land use, stewardship for the land, a need to conserve educational and cultural pursuits, and civic unity and involvement. And all of these aspects were advanced and furthered by the compact physical design of this community, where people would live in close proximity to each other and interact in their daily lives without being, if you will, settling out in distant areas where the opportunities for interaction would be more scarce. It was absolutely critical to Brigham Young, and it's a bit amusing when you think about it. Brigham Young pulled Jesse Fox aside, his surveyor, who he had, the same fellow who surveyed in the Central Block, and he basically said, Jesse, you are going to survey when I tell you and where I tell you. And under no circumstances are you going to subdivide somebody's land so that they can sell it. Brigham was very much opposed to subdividing land. William Clayton, in fact, described in his journal that on day 2 of arriving in the Salt Lake Valley in July of 1847, so the Saints are tired, they're exhausted, they're building dugouts, they're wondering how they're going to survive, and Brigham brings them together, and he gives them a discourse essentially on land use and urban planning. And this is what William Clayton recorded: "No man will be suffered to cut up his lot and sell a part to speculate out of his brethren. Each man must keep his lot whole, for the Lord has given it to us without price. Every man should have his land measured off to him for city and farming purposes, and what he could till. He might till as he pleased, but he should be industrious and take care of it." So the consequence of not subdividing land and maintaining this compact size is described by George Q. Cannon this way: "There was no monopoly of land allowed. No man was permitted to take up a city lot or farming land for purposes of speculation. Farming land was divided and given out in small parcels so that all could have a proper portion. The enforcement of this rule made the settlement of the city and the farming lands very compact," and then here's the key point George Buchanan makes, "and created a community of interest which would not have been felt under any other circumstances."
So 21 years ago, I bought a third of an acre in Sandy. What happened along the way? Where and why did it change?
The changes occurred over time, I think somewhat naturally. You have what I would characterize as a secularization of our land use and growth. With the coming railroad, it became critical that we have a federal land office that would allow for the recording of deeds and the conveyance of real property more easily. And so the officials here, and of course we were a territory at the time, petitioned the federal government to open a federal land office, which occurred in 1869. By the 1870s, with the railroad bringing in many newcomers, the church leaders naturally relinquished control over land use policies to a more democratic process. But still in 1870, over 90% of Salt Lake's population were LDS. And that, of course, that demographic shift occurred dramatically over the next 20 years. By 1890, about half of Salt Lake City's 45,000 residents were not Mormons. So we had this influx of others to the valley. They weren't interested in following the original land use. And certainly the church leaders by the 1880s were not in a position and probably didn't want to try to enforce their compact urban design on the citizenry, which by then really wasn't interested in it. For one thing, in the 1880s, we went through a difficult period of our history where the Edmund Tucker Act was being enforced. Church leaders were worried about the government literally seizing the church's assets. They had a lot of preoccupations. Probably the last thing on anybody's mind was to maintain the tight urban grid design, and it started to fade away. But I think the most important reason for the change in the urban design that you're mentioning now is illuminated by George Buchanan in a conference talk that he gave in 1889. This is what he said: "We have been called to gather, not to scatter, not to spread out all over creation and become so thin and so weak that there's no strength or power with us. We should concentrate ourselves and combine our efforts and not look to the ends of the earth and see how much is going to waste that we are missing. There are a great many people who seem to have that idea in earnest, and because there are large tracts of land of which they hear in remote valleys, they are anxious to strike out and take possession for fear that somebody else will get them. This is not wise. We can grow fast enough right along here in these valleys which are already occupied by making use of the facilities within our reach." So I think what that illuminates is that we probably shouldn't really blame the influx that the railroad brought in. Clearly, by the late 1880s, there was a bit of a land rush going on, and rather than gathering, people felt compelled to scatter while there was still homesteads and good ranch land, not just on the outskirts in the Salt Lake Valley, but all over the state. Of course, the Brethren did have a far-reaching settlement effort where they sent families and brethren into distant locations to create new Mormon settlements. But what George Buchanan is talking about here is the drive to unilaterally, on their own, just go out and homestead, which was their legal right to do, but it diminished this sense of community, which caused apparently George Buchanan to feel some grief about and mention in a conference talk.
You're listening to Legacy here on the Mormon Channel. I'm Nathan Wright, and I'm visiting today with Craig Galley about Joseph Smith's City of Zion design. And let's return to the 5 attributes that Joseph and Brigham were trying to achieve by this. One that you mentioned is the environmental stewardship. And a quote that you have from Brigham Young that I would like to read here is having to do with the need to beautify. He said, "Progress and improve upon and make beautiful everything around you. Build cities, adorn your habitations, make gardens, orchards, and vineyards, and render the earth so pleasant that when you look upon your labors, you may do so with pleasure, and that angels may delight to come and visit your beautiful locations." Aside from the astounding fact that he, said angels would want to visit people if they're nice, it reminds me of President Kimball's plea back in the 70s for people to clean up, fix up, and just make everything look nice. What are some other facets of that environmental stewardship that you find
Brigham Young clearly had a conservation ethic, and I think this conservation ethic or environmental stewardship notion came from his belief that the earth was holy, and he said as much. Quote, "The earth under their feet will be holy. The soil of the earth will bring forth in its strength, and the fruits thereof will be meat for man." Speaking of the elements in the creation of God, in their nature they are as pure as the heavens. The Lord blesses the land, the air, and the water where the saints are permitted to live. So he viewed the earth and the land and the resources as being sacred, and it was incredibly important that we were good stewards of what we had been given. He said in 1870, for example, "There is only so much property in the world. There are the elements that belong to this globe and no more. All our commercial transactions must be confined to this little earth, and its wealth cannot be increased or diminished." So Brigham Young echoed the need to be good stewards. We find the scripture in D&C 104, verses 17 and 18, that tells us the same thing and connects being good stewards with imparting sufficient needs for the poor and needy. Otherwise, we would be in some divine trouble. Brigham Young took this very, very seriously, and as a consequence, during the early settlement in the Salt Lake Valley, when we saw new immigrants arriving in the Salt Lake Valley, Brigham Young would meet with his bishops and survey the land that was being used, and where he saw there was land that was unused, he then might have it subdivided and given to another brother who may have just arrived with his family. His view was that we didn't own what the Lord had given us. The land was sacred. We're just stewards of it. And where he saw a need for new immigrants who arrived to be able to partake of the earth's bounty, he wanted to make sure that the land was being used appropriately, but also productively. So his land use ethic still inspires many people today.
So you already touched on the advantages of this design for education and cultural pursuits. Let's move on to the civic unity and involvement. What that particular attribute has to do with the original plat.
Joseph Smith explained that the building up of Zion is as much one man's business as another's. Party feelings, separate interests, exclusive designs should be lost sight of in the one common cause in the interest of the whole. And Brigham Young reiterated the need for the Zion community living in the city of Zion, if you will, to pull together. Quote, "Let every individual in this city feel the same interest for the public good as he does for his own, and you will at once see this community still more prosperous and still more rapidly increasing in wealth, influence, and power. But where one seeks to benefit himself or herself alone and does not cherish a feeling for the prosperity and benefit of the whole, that people will be disorderly, unhappy, and poverty-stricken, and distress, animosity, and strife will reign. Let every man and woman be industrious, prudent, and economical in their acts and feelings, and while gathering to themselves, let each one strive to identify his or her interests with the interests of this community, with those of their neighbor and the neighborhood. Let them seek their happiness and welfare in that of all, and we will be blessed and prospered." I believe Brigham Young literally believed that if the people of the church, the early Mormon settlers, became disunited in their efforts to achieve wealth and disparity occurred amongst the saints, then that would hurt the cause of Zion. Conversely, as we see from this statement, he strongly believed that if everyone pulled together in this new little community out in the far reaches of the West, out in the Mexican territory, that the people would prosper, everybody would benefit, and that's what he sought to accomplish, and that the effort of maintaining the compact society where everybody pulled together and worked together for their mutual interests would best achieve that unity that he believed needed to occur in among a Zion people.
Seems in today's world there's been a re-emphasis put on diversity and tolerance, as well there should be. But you've added this as one of the attributes of this Zion community. Tell me about that.
Well, it was interesting. By 1870, there was a substantial influx of foreign-born Mormon converts, mostly from the British Isles and Scandinavia, into the Salt Lake Valley. So that by 1870, over 65% of Salt Lake residents were foreign-born. And if we could turn the clock back in time, if we walked our streets and went into shops and our churches, we would hear foreign languages and the accents of immigrants from Northern Europe and elsewhere who had gathered to Zion. And Brigham loved this diversity. He valued the cultural diversity within the community of saints. He fondly characterized them as a mixed people, quote, gathered from so many of the nations of the world with their different customs and traditions, associating with a kind, friendly feeling nowhere else to be found, dwelling together on the most friendly terms and with brotherly feelings. Into whatever neighborhood you go throughout these valleys and the mountains, amid the great variety of nationalities, with all their different habits and traditions, you find the warmest affection pervading the people. Brigham loved that diversity. He loved to see people of different backgrounds and different cultures maintaining those, what he called habits and traditions, and yet all pulling together as a Zion people. He loved that. And then, of course, into the 1880s and 90s, we had new immigrants who arrived in the Salt Lake Valley from Southern and Eastern Europe. They played a very important role in Utah's developing mining industry and the railroads and mills. And they, too, brought a rich culture and made a remarkable contribution to the Salt Lake Valley and all of the state of Utah.
And, of course, the last of your attributes is caring for the needy. It seems like if all these other attributes are actually in line, this caring for the needy should just sort of take place. That's what I would think.
That is a very interesting point. Brigham worried that as the people prospered, they would forget the needy among them. Here's what Brigham taught in 1877. The earth is here, and the fullness thereof is here. It was made for man, and one man was not made to trample his fellow man under his feet and enjoy all his heart desires while the thousands suffer. We will take a moral view, a political view, and see the inequality that exists in the human family. The Latter-day Saints will never accomplish their mission until this inequality shall cease on the earth. If the people called Latter-day Saints do not become one in temporal things as they are in spiritual things, they will not redeem and build up the Zion of God upon the earth. So he was so concerned that as the people prospered, they would remember the poor, and especially the immigrants, who he made sure were greeted at Emigration Square, fed and entertained. He had bishops there to warmly welcome them into their ward, and he organized the bishops so that there wasn't an undue burden imposed on any one ward or bishop in supplying the newcomers with food, shelter, and sustenance until they became self-sufficient.
So anyone who has lived in Salt Lake City for any amount of time is aware of and probably part of the pride of its wide streets here. And that was part of the original plan, as I recall, so they could turn a wagon around. I'm not sure if that was the actual reason for it, but they were wide enough for that very reason. Let's talk about some of the original things in Salt Lake City here.
That's right. We did have wide streets, and some have said, and it is apocryphal, that Brigham Young wanted to be able to turn around a wagon. Well, that wasn't the case. Brigham Young looked at the city of Zion plat, and Joseph Smith wanted the central arteries to be 132 feet wide, and if it was good enough for Joseph, that's what Brigham was going to go with. As I mentioned, the the outlying streets were somewhat narrower. But you're absolutely right. These wide streets are an absolute icon for the Salt Lake Valley. Some planners and city designers have criticized the wide streets because if you have wide streets for automobile traffic, that will increase the velocity that automobiles can travel and make it less friendly for pedestrians and actually more dangerous in the downtown area where you might have large numbers of pedestrians trying to walk around, and the wide streets with cars traveling fast can impair the walkability, if you will, of a city. But the wide streets had some enormous advantages that we sometimes overlook. For one thing, with our wide streets, as the streets were, in many cities, had to be widened to accommodate the automobiles to have 4 to 6 lanes of traffic. Sadly, many historic homes and buildings and even churches and cultural landmarks had to be torn down to make room for wide streets. That wasn't the case in Salt Lake City. We were able to preserve so many of our historic residents and buildings that we see and enjoy today because those streets were initially so wide they could easily be adapted to the automobile. But even long before the automobile, another transportation innovation came around that seemed to be perfectly suited for our wide streets, and that is, of course, our trolley system. Those wide streets accommodated the construction of our streetcar lines, usually located in the medians of the street with very little disturbance to existing structures. So as a consequence, as we had this dense community with wide streets, it was ideal for an early mass transit system. Our first trolleys appeared in 1872. They were drawn by mules and horses. When the trolley system at its infancy began to be struggling a little bit financially, the church assisted the trolley system. Brigham Young thought it so important that this mode of transportation be encouraged, so that by 1889, Salt Lake completed construction of its electric car system, streetcar system, which was just 1 year after the nation's first electric streetcar system commenced operation in Richmond, Virginia. So we were on the cutting edge of mass transit, and from there it even got bigger. By 1914, approximately half of all adults living in Salt Lake City rode the streetcars on a daily basis, and we had 26 interurban trains which carried 800 passengers between Salt Lake and Provo each day. In the late 1920s, as asphalt replaced most dirt roads to better accommodate cars, Salt Lake City was the first city to outfit trolley cars with pneumatic rubber tires that could be used without a track. And these were kind of a sensation. Delegations from 26 states and 13 countries visited Salt Lake City in the 1920s to study the highly innovative design and operation of Salt Lake's trolley system. Eventually, our early mass transit system traveled over 1,200 miles of roads and covered 150 miles of streets. So you could travel on this system 12,000 miles. The mobility was just absolutely extraordinary. The transit numbers, as we try to look back and correlate them with transit ridership today, Salt Lake City's transit ridership in the 1920s was pretty close to what we see in New York City's transit ridership today.
I moved here in 1981, and we had buses. That was it. That was mass transit. So what happened to the trolley?
The trolley has an interesting history, not just in Salt Lake City, but throughout the West. Of course, over time, the automobile gradually displaced rail and trolley service. People were able to afford cars, especially after World War II. And in 1941, the last streetcar in Salt Lake City was decommissioned. I don't generally ascribe to conspiracy theories, but a well-documented conspiracy caused the ultimate demise of Salt Lake City's trolley system. There was a consortium of automobile, tire, and oil companies which went around the country and they acquired these trolley and streetcar systems for the purpose of dismantling them in order to create a monopoly for automobiles, which would increase sales of rubber tires and oil. Now, again, this sounds like a wild conspiracy theory, but this is very well documented because this action resulted in a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. There were numerous dozens of trolley systems that were acquired in different cities and dismantled, and the prosecution was appealed all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And so, as an attorney, I can go to the cases of the U.S. Supreme Court decisions and read all about this conspiracy, which was reported in the United States versus National City Lines, the Supreme Court decision in 1947, and it describes in detail how Salt Lake City's trolley system and the trolley systems of 43 other cities were dismantled. The consortium leaders were prosecuted, and their sentences were upheld all the way to the Supreme Court.
Well, of course, we know about a decade ago or so we finally got a train system again, and it's growing and doing quite well.
It is.
So we know that control basically over urban planning was relinquished by the church and the leaders of the day based on the influx of everyone just coming to Utah. What happened in later years?
After World War II, we no longer had the trolley system. We were completely dependent on automobiles, which became very affordable and something that families relished. They were a wonderful way to travel around. Virtually all residential and commercial real estate development after World War II was designed to accommodate automobile traffic. After World War II, we also saw a shortage of homes in the Salt Lake Valley. The mayor of Salt Lake requested that developers try to build 10 new homes every day to meet the shortfall of housing units, and developers accommodated, and they started building as fast as they could in the outlying suburbs where land was plentiful and less expensive, and basically everything south of 21st South we see for the most part, not entirely, but an abandonment of the original city design plat. Ironically, many of the streets became more narrow, and we no longer saw the tight grid system, which was such the hallmark of Salt Lake City.
I remember a news story some years back. Once the freeways were getting more congested, and we still hadn't had the new I-15 renovation yet, and things were getting pretty gnarly. And the title of the story was Lost Vision. And so I kind of, based on what I'm hearing here, it wasn't necessarily a loss of vision as much as a loss of control.
That is a fair statement. An early planner, George Smeeth, who worked in Salt Lake County, lamented that the comprehensive approach to community problems was lost as decision-making passed from the hands of a centralized authority, in this case the church, into hands that were generally of private interest. So we see that by the 1970s, these along the Wasatch Front, one could characterize the development and growth patterns as being very similar to other Western cities that were growing quickly and experienced traffic congestion and other problems. One local historian, Charles S. Peterson, characterized in 1979 the development along the Wasatch Front this way: whether in the satellite communities or the large centers of the Wasatch Front, the problems of urban sprawl and industrialization are very much with Utahns today. Prime farmlands are devoted to parking lots and subdivisions. Pollution and many of the social problems that attend urban growth are part of the scene. Visitors exclaim as how like other cities Utah population centers are, yet urban Utah is the product of the interplay of natural and cultural forces found no place else and possess qualities of its own. So we still have this kernel of uniqueness, but more and more our communities along the Wasatch Front look like other communities. I experienced, in kind of a humorous way, what a realization that is to some people who have not spent much time here. In the early 90s, a friend of mine from my mission in Spain, who was a convert to the church and grew up in the eastern United States, had not spent any time at all in the Salt Lake Valley until his daughter was accepted to BYU. So he and his wife flew in and got on I-15, and instead of traveling south, traveled north. They took a wrong exit and got off in North Salt Lake, where the refineries and some sexually oriented businesses are, and he was shocked out of his mind. They got back on the freeway, headed the right direction, and saw along the I-15 corridor the billboards and a lot of gaudiness, and he got off too early to take the BYU exit and got off on what he described as about 5 miles of strip malls. And by the time they dropped their daughter off, came and visited with us, they were, both he and his wife, who hadn't been here before, like I said, were visibly shaken at what they saw. It certainly wasn't what they were expecting.
This is Legacy on the Mormon Channel. We're visiting with Craig Galli today about his BYU Studies article, Building Zion, the Latter-day Saint Legacy of Urban Planning. Salt Lake is in the midst, actually getting close to finishing this Downtown Rising project, and I'm wondering what influence the original design of Salt Lake City may have had on what is happening today.
I think we see some very exciting things in our community. There is sometimes express recognition that the city of Zion Plat itself provides some ideals for designing communities that are livable and sustainable. In other instances, we have independently concluded, and by we I mean professional urban planners, that this concept of an urban village, which at least in a central of a city is fairly high density and walkable and has mixed use, is the kind of place where a lot of people like to live, and environmentally it's more sustainable. The genius behind the city of Zion Plat and the explanatory marginalia has been recognized by some of the leading urban planners in the country. So much so that in 1996, the American Institute of Certified Urban Planners awarded the Joseph Smith City of Zion Plat the National Planning Landmark Award, which acknowledged it as one of the earliest examples of smart growth. You can find a plaque at the Brigham Young Historic Park at the corner of State Street and North Temple, which commemorates this 1996 award. The plaque reads, "The plat of the City of Zion incorporated in a remarkable treatise on urban design addressed to the leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by Joseph Smith on June 25, 1833, guided the development of over 500 settlements in the Intermountain West, establishing a continuing commitment to the building of well-planned and culturally nourishing cities." One professional planner in this area recently observed that the Mormon Village was an extraordinary example of a sustainable community. Sustainability requires community, a critical ingredient that has almost disappeared in this country. The self-centered, me-first individual in society would need to be replaced by a group-oriented person in community. Like the Mormon Village, a sustainable community must have a clear strategy or master plan for survival. Citizens who fully comprehend the strategy and a dogged commitment to make it work, the sustainable community must have a strong connection with nature and the sustaining lands. Its members must have a strong connection with each other. I believe that the church leaders and the effort behind the revitalization of Salt Lake City with the City Creek project understand completely this connection between a well-planned and a sustainable community, with also a commitment to environmental stewardship. We see that the buildings that are being constructed in the Downtown Rising project have LEED certification, which is a architectural certification which indicates that they have been designed using materials and in ways that will conserve energy. We see the Downtown Rising project will be mixed use. It's intended for people to be able to live and walk to meet their needs. We'll see a downtown grocery store, which we haven't had for many years in the heart of downtown Salt Lake City. We'll see hundreds of new apartments that will bring thousands of people that will live and work in the downtown. We're already seeing that happen, not just in the church's Downtown Rising project, but in the environs close to downtown Salt Lake. New higher density development going in and making this downtown Salt Lake a more livable, attractive area. If you come down here into the downtown just about any evening in the spring or summer, the streets are full of people. Our restaurants are full. We have outdoor gatherings and concerts and cultural activities. We have one of the most vibrant, growing downtown areas. And this is even before the Salt Lake City Rising project is complete. So I'm absolutely convinced that some of these same good planning and design principles have inspired and will continue to inspire development, not just in Salt Lake City, but in the environs as well. We see the Daybreak project by Rio Tinto, which incorporates many of the same grid, higher density, mixed-use concepts. And that is becoming a thriving community. People are willing to pay a premium to live there because of the excellence underlying the design, which reflects in many, many instances the City of Zion plat and principles underlying what Joseph Smith and Brigham Young intended to develop here. So I think around the country we're seeing a greater realization that design matters, that having as big a lot and as big a house as possible and living in a neighborhood where all of the homes are the same and you can't walk to anywhere, you have to drive. Children are not able to ride their bikes safely. This is not the kind of neighborhood or community that we want to live in. There are better ways to design neighborhoods and city centers, and we're starting to see that more and more around the country. And it's gratifying to see planners and the professional organization of certified urban planners recognize the genius underlying the City of Zion plat.
So all of those, shall we say, temporal benefits are quite evident. What are some of the theological implications based on this?
Brigham Young taught that the saints must prepare to build the City of Zion in anticipation of the Lord's second coming, as you mentioned a moment ago at the start of this program. He said, and basically asked the saints this question: are we prepared now to establish the Zion that the Lord designs to build up? I have many times asked the questions, where is the man that knows how to lay the first rock for the wall that is to surround the New Jerusalem, or the Zion of God on the earth? Where is the man who knows how to construct the first gate of the city? Where is the man who understands how to build up the kingdom of God in its purity and to prepare for Zion to come down to meet it? Well, says one, I thought the Lord was going to do this. So he is, if we will let him. That is what we want. We want the people to be willing for the Lord to do it. But he will do it by means. He will not send his angels to gather up the rock to build up the New Jerusalem. He will not send his angels from the heavens to go to the mountains to cut the timber and make it into lumber to adorn the city of Zion. He has called upon us to do this work, and if we will let him work by, through, and with us, he can accomplish it. Otherwise, we shall fall short and shall never have the honor of building up Zion on the earth. The thing I love about this quote is, while Zion is an ideal, and we certainly don't gather to Zion in the Salt Lake Valley, Zion is where the saints are, where the stakes of Zion are strong. That is clearly a central meaning of Zion. Zion is also eventually going to be a place. It's going to be a place worthy of the Lord's second coming, and it's going to be built by people who want to build a community that reflects the highest ideals of community. And that is something that we need to start working on. President Gordon B. Hinckley reminded us, if we are to build that Zion of which the prophets have spoken and of which the Lord has given mighty promise, we must set aside our consuming selfishness. We must rise above our love for comfort and ease. And in the very process of effort and struggle, even in our extremity, we shall become better acquainted with our God. So the building up of better communities has very, very significant spiritual implications, and one could argue is a step towards being worthy for the Lord to return to his people.
Thank you. This has been an amazing conversation, all from a simple plat, and knowing that the prophet Joseph was inspired in his drawings. Craig Galley, thank you very much for being with us today on the Mormon Channel here on Legacy. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.